Libraries collect, organize, preserve, and share. That's what we do. That's what we have always done. The things that we collect have changed. Stories, information, ideas. The formats that have carried these things have changed throughout time. The ways we have organized them have changed. Tags on the ends of scrolls, right on up through the digital online catalogs. Preservation methods have progressed from hiding clay tablets in jars under the desert to microfilm to digital files. Sharing has gone from one-on-one, in-person storytelling to being able to send information from Buchanan, West Virginia to Antarctica at the touch of a button. We have actually done this. But no matter what new things may come our way in the future, as long as the central core is strong, libraries will find ways to fulfill their mission: collect, organize, preserve, and share. In prehistoric times, information was shared around the campfire. The term oral tradition covers a wide variety of ways that people communicated with each other. Grunts, gestures, stories, songs, dances, spells, often done in rhyme, with repetition to help with memorization. They did these things to share important information, to entertain each other with stories about exciting events. Societies were formed around shared experiences, shared knowledge, and personal interactions. Cultures were understood as people formed connections. We still do this, actually. When children learn Little Miss Muffet, or Jack and Jill, or Ring Around the Rosie, they pick up cultural clues. When we hear or sing folk songs, we can learn about events of the past. As a junior high student, we all sang a song called The Green Beret. It was a catchy tune and told of men training to go to the Vietnam War, especially a specific unit. The chorus said, "Silver wings upon their chest, these are men, America's best. 100 men will test today, but only 3 win the Green Beret." As the verses went on, a soldier trained, deployed, was killed, and then left a message to his wife regarding their young son, which said, "Put silver wings on my son's chest. Make him one of America's best. He'll be a man they'll test one day. Have him win the Green Beret." The song gave meaning and made personal an event that is difficult to understand. When we tell ghost stories around a campfire, or sing songs at camp, or listen to Grandpa and Grandma tell stories about their childhood, we connect on a very deep level. What kinds of information did they gather, organize, preserve, and share? They shared information. Where is the herd of animals? What is the best method of hunting? What plants can we eat? Which are poisonous? When is the best time to plant crops? What kind? Best way to ensure a good harvest? They entertained each other. Stories about the hunt. This may be where fiction was invented. Can you imagine? The woolly mammoth was huge, and it was chasing me when I turned and killed it with my bare hands. Eventually, they put information together to create trade records for how many items they had traded with other groups and what they received in return. Business was born. How did they accomplish such a thing? Storytelling around the campfire was the earliest way, but they needed to make it more permanent. People died. Cave paintings, couldn't take those along if they needed to move to another area. Cuneiform tablets, more mobile but heavy and hard to transport. Scrolls, more mobile but easily damaged. Books, less fragile. And why? To survive in the present, to thrive in the future, and especially for future generations. Let's explore some of these methods of preservation and sharing. When we hear about cave drawings, we sometimes think of this as some sort of isolated event. In reality, there have been thousands discovered, many in Europe and the Middle East, but even in Australia. Reaching back tens of thousands of years into human history, cave paintings and other forms of ancient art show the inborn roots of our desire for self-expression. But exactly who were the Stone Age artists, whose hands collectively painted, molded, or carved what remains of their art. What were their messages? Sometimes the message may be as simple as, "We were here." Stone Age cave painters were realists, painting what they saw rather than what they imagined. They painted about the hunt, the animals, things that they experienced. Paintings were often laid out in scenes to tell a story. Researchers believe that flute music would have accompanied art displays, music that can no longer be heard and have no real conception of how it sounded. Flutes made of bone were found by a University of Paris researcher in a cave filled with Stone Age paintings on its walls. The most acoustically resonant part of the cave also happened to be the spot with the highest concentration of artwork. As time went on, cultures became more sophisticated in their writing. Let's look at ancient Egypt, for example. Even though we may think that Egyptian hieroglyphics are fairly simple, the truth is that it is fairly complex. Some symbols represented words, some represented phrases, others represented sounds. Some of these may look fairly obvious, but some are a bit of a stretch from our 21st century perspective. Just as we use various levels of formality, so did the Egyptians. All hieroglyphics were not the same. We may text our friends, write emails to our professors, business letters, or personal letters. Even the method of reading them was not the same. Hieroglyphics could be read left to right, or right to left, or potentially in columns instead of rows. One main clue is which way the animal characters are facing. No wonder there are people who spend their whole lives studying about this. Click here to see what your name would look like in hieroglyphics. We like to think of ourselves as much more sophisticated, but we are using more and more of these types of symbols all the time. This one doesn't need much translation or interpretation. Sumer was at the southern end of ancient Mesopotamia. It was a very advanced culture in what has been called the cradle of society. They learned to domesticate the animals that they had hunted for food and to grow their own. They learned to farm and even created irrigation to help it be more successful. They had a common language. They invented the wheel, the plow, and writing. They wrote down their laws. You may have heard of the law of Hammurabi. They played games such as the ancient game of and the rules to play it have been preserved on cuneiform tablets. They wrote some stories and literature that also survive, such as the story of Gilgamesh. A list of their kings and their dates and accomplishments was found written in cuneiform on this stone. Early cuneiform was almost exclusively used for accounting and record keeping, although diaries and letters have been discovered. Languages included Sumerian, Babylonian, and Hittite. Some literature, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, has survived. Dating from about 2100 BCE, it is the Mesopotamian version of the flood story, which precedes the biblical version in the book of Genesis. It was written on 12 tablets, the best of which were discovered in the library ruins of King Ashurbanipal in 7th century BCE. You have probably heard of the Rosetta Stone language software, but you may not know the story of the true Rosetta Stone. In July of 1799, during Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian campaign, a French soldier discovered a slab almost 4 feet long and 2.5 feet wide, about 35 miles north of Alexandria, near the town of Rosetta. The irregularly shaped stone contained fragments of passages written in 3 different scripts: Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and Egyptian Demotic. The ancient Greek on the Rosetta Stone told archaeologists that it was inscribed by priests honoring the king of Egypt, Ptolemy V, in the 2nd century BC. More startlingly, the Greek passage announced that the 3 scripts were all of identical meaning. The artifact thus held the key to solving the riddle of hieroglyphics, a written language that had been dead for nearly 2,000 years. When the British defeated Napoleon in 1801, they took possession of the Rosetta Stone, studied it, and housed it at the British Museum in London. It has been there since 1802, except for a brief period during World War I, when it was moved to a secure underground location to protect it from the threat of bombs. Once the Rosetta Stone inscriptions were translated, the language and culture of ancient Egypt was suddenly opened to scientists as never before. I also had the chance to see this stone in person in May 2015 at the British Museum. Writing on stones had been very effective, but by the end of the last century BCE, the most popular format for writing was much lighter and more portable. Scrolls were made by taking pieces of parchment or vellum and attaching them together. These were widely used in many areas of the world and in many cultures. Syria, Babylon, Greece, Rome, and Asia used them. One culture, which we generally connect with scrolls, is the Jewish culture. The Jewish religion wrote their sacred texts in scrolls, and still use this format for reading them in synagogues. Some of the most famous scrolls are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were discovered in 1947 in caves in the Judean desert. They tell the story of the exciting period of Judean history from the Second Temple period, 520 BCE to 70 CE. Because they were in such an arid environment for so many centuries, they are pretty well preserved. They are being taken care of, restored, and digitized at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Shortly after the time of Christ, a new format was developed and became more popular. This was called the Codex, and looks much more like the books with which we are familiar. There were several things that made this popular. It was easier to flip back and forth between sections. The ink was not as likely to flake off from being rolled up and becoming loose. They were easier to carry on long journeys and were less likely to be damaged. A lot of people have worked very hard to preserve information for future generations. A lot of different formats have been used in the process. The more information is saved, preserved, and shared, the more important it becomes to find a way to organize it so it can be used. Here is an assignment for you. In your journal, list 5 formats that have been used throughout time for record keeping or to pass information along to future generations. People have long used what was most available in order to document their lives and to entertain each other. When you look at the expanse of time that has come before us, it is clear that our perspective is very new. We are now in a period of great change and opportunity in the digital age. From the dawn of time up until about 1900, human knowledge doubled about every 100 years. After World War II, things sped up, doubling about every 25 years. Today, human knowledge doubles about every 13 months. Libraries collect, organize, preserve, and share. That's what we do. That's what we have always done. The things that we collect have changed. Stories, information, ideas. The formats that have carried these things have changed throughout time. The ways we have organized them have changed. Tags on the ends of scrolls, right on up through digital online catalogs. Preservation methods have progressed from hiding clay tablets in jars under the desert to microfilm to digital files. Sharing has gone from one-on-one in-person storytelling to being able to send information from Buchanan, West Virginia to Antarctica at the touch of a button. We have actually done this. But no matter what new things may come our way in the future, as long as this central core is strong, libraries will always find ways to fulfill the mission. Collect, organize, preserve, and share.
Congratulations! You have completed the interactive lesson on ancient libraries. Be sure that you have completed the journal responses which were assigned throughout the lesson.